Take it away, Elaine.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about my probably favorite subject in gardening, hydrangeas. Hopefully I'll get a lot of information to you, and I will leave some time for questions, but as Maggie said, we do want to be finished in about 50 minutes. So we can always take some. If Maggie has them, she can always send me an email and I can get those questions. So what we're going to cover today basically is we're going to do a bit of an overview, talk a little bit about the origins of hydrangeas and the different species. We'll talk about basic requirements for success. I'm kind of assuming, correctly, I hope, that people are familiar and have hydrangeas in their yards. So some of this information may be old, some of it may be new. Something that people are always interested in knowing about is pruning. I am of the school that less pruning is better. In some situations, you really do need to prune. One of those is, if you take a look at this first picture, my oak leaf hydrangea in front of my house definitely needs to undergo pruning. This was a few years ago, and believe it or not, it's even larger now. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about the uses of hydrangea, both in the garden and in the home. And then something that Maggie particularly said was of interest to the group was the value of hydrangea as pollinators. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the Mount Cuba Center research report. You can actually get this off their website, and I'm going to give you the link to where you can go. They have a report that they did, a research report that spanned over 5 years on wild hydrangeas for the Mid-Atlantic region, and it does cover pollination or attracting pollinators quite a bit. So let's first talk about the origins of the common hydrangeas, the ones that are most familiar. They basically originated in the Far East, China, Japan, Korea, and the main type, the type that you probably see in the landscape more than any other type, is the Macrophylla. Those are the mop heads, the blue one that you see there. I believe that's an endless summer, but it could be a Nico blue. And lace caps, the one you see there is Tokyo Delight, one of my personal favorites, and actually what kind of drew me into hydrangeas to begin with. We've got the Paniculatas, and the climbing hydrangeas, the anomalous. While these aren't natives, they are very, very well suited to our climate. Hydrangeas do very well on the East Coast for the most part, except for the far south, although there are some varieties that do well there. And they're easy care, they're beautiful, they're long bloomers, and they have very few problems. Now, we do have two native varieties, and these are native to the eastern United States, and that is the Quercufolia, which is the oak leaf hydrangea, named because of the actually shape of the leaf, obviously. So that one that you see there is the Quercufolia you see there is the young version of that one that you saw in that first picture. So they do get rather large. They can, certain varieties, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then again, one of my personal favorite, the Arborescens, or the smooth hydrangea. These are the ones you'll find out that tend to be really favored by pollinators, and they are also the ones that the Mount Cuba Center report kind of emphasized as a native hydrangea. There are about 70 to 80 known species of hydrangeas. There are, as I said, many wild hydrangeas. For example, in China, I heard an interesting talk a few months ago by a speaker for the American Hydrangea Society who talked about he and a fellow gardener, researcher, they've been on many trips to China to try to discover these new varieties. They are not cultivated for the most part in the United States, but these two gentlemen are actually interested in seeing if they could be cultivated in the United States. So really only about 5 or 6 of the known species are actually cultivated in North America, but there are many, many cultivars. As they've become more popular, especially the Macrophyllas, you really have seen kind of an explosion of different sizes, colors, varieties. So that's one of the things that makes it a really interesting and popular plant. So what are the basic requirements for success? Well, just to have just a little recap right now, if you look at those flower types, we basically have 3 types of flowers that differentiate hydrangeas. The one at the top, the snowball type look, that's the mop head. The Paniculata is the cone-shaped flower, and the lace cap is the one that is the pink one. That is has sterile flowers on the outside and fertile flowers on the inside, and we'll talk more about that. Most hydrangeas prefer kind of a woodsy edge, but there are some, particularly the Quercufolias, who can take more sun and more dryness, can tolerate more dryness, are good for foundation plantings. As you saw again from that first picture, you do need to be aware of how large a plant a Quercufolia can get. And then you need to be judicious about the way you plant it and the way you prune it, and the fact that they will self-propagate. But when I say woodsy edges, they really like filtered sunlight. Most hydrangeas cannot tolerate afternoon sun or western sun or intense southern sun. So you really are looking for a spot where you can have morning sun and afternoon shade. That's where they're going to do best. Moisture, you do need even moisture and well-drained soil. Actually, the soil that we have here with a kind of a combination of a clay loam actually is pretty well suited to a hydrangea because they do tend to retain water more, and the hydrangeas like that. You will need to water during a drought period. Your hydrangea will tell you if it needs water. Its leaves will kind of start to droop, so it'll be pretty obvious if they do. So that's something that you need to be aware of. And pruning, the most important thing about pruning is know which type of hydrangea you have, whether it blooms on old or new wood, and then when to prune it, and certainly why to prune it, the reasons for pruning. So let's talk a little bit about pruning basics, and then I will just have a short little stop to see if we have any questions about that. The main reasons to prune are to control the size and shape, to rejuvenate the plant, and of course to remove any kind of dead or diseased sections that might be on it. The pruning method that you use, as I said before, is based on the type of hydrangea that you have. So we've got 3 different methods that we use. So method number 1, we bloom if the plant blooms on old wood, and those are the original Macrophyllas. The Macrophyllas now, there are a lot of the ones that they call rebloomers or everbloomers. Endless Summer is the trademark of the first everbloomer that was actually marketed.
So the Macrophyllas are the Korean and the Asian ones?
Yes, they are.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Then the oak leaves, the Quercufolias, those are the ones that also bloom on old wood. Almost exclusively. There really aren't a lot of rebloomers. The lovely thing about the Quercufolias, though, is they have such a long bloom period. You really can have flowers on the oak leaves from late spring all the way into the fall and beyond. They're not still blooming, but the flowers do remain, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And your climbing hydrangeas, those are also old wood. So what you want to do with those plants is you want to prune them when they're actively blooming or in the June, July, August period, depending on what the climate is like, just as the flowers start to dry. They can also be pruned when dormant, when the structure is much more visible. I tend to do that unless that oak leaf has just like taken over and no one can walk in the front door. I tend to do it at this time of the year. So it's before they start blooming, but when all the leaves are gone and you can actually see it. So you can pick out more readily if you have, for example, canes that are dead or just the structure does not look like it is really suitable. The method number 2 blooms on new woods. Paniculatas and Arborescens, the smooth hydrangea and what they call the PGs are the ones that can be pruned, that bloom on new wood and pretty much can be pruned anytime after they flower, but definitely before the new growth begins. So that's the October to April period. Yes.
I think you're going just a little bit fast.
Okay.
So the paniculatas, those are also Asian?
They are.
And the other one that you mentioned?
The Arborescens, those are natives. And the Quercufolias are natives.
Oh, the Quercufolias are natives, but they bloom on the old wood.
Correct.
Okay, but the paniculatas and the Arborescens bloom on the new wood.
On the new wood, yes.
So then you can cut them back quite a bit then.
Yes.
Okay.
And the paniculatas, if you've ever seen the hydrangeas that are trained into tree form, they require some judicious pruning if you want to train them into tree form. So you really need to be a bit more careful when you're training it. So you want to make sure that the main trunk and the top branches are not removed so that it retains that tree form. Okay. So Annabelle's, the Arborescens, the Annabelle's the most common one, but we'll talk about a lot of the new varieties of Arborescens that have been developed. They can actually be cut almost all the way down to the ground, and they will still regrow and bloom in a single season. The Annabelles tend to have floppier canes. So what you may want to do is leave some of the canes there to kind of prop up the new ones as they grow and come in. Any questions on those two?
Well, I just have a comment. I inherited, that is when we bought our house, it has a number of Annabelles. Mm-hmm. And it's frequently visited by very, very tiny bees.
Okay.
Very, very tiny bees, which you would almost not even see unless you were like, had your face practically in the blooms. And I thought that might have been impossible because I thought Annabelles were supposed to be sterile, but maybe they're not entirely sterile.
Well, as they come out, and we are going to talk a little bit more about flower structure later, and as they come out, especially the smaller bees will look. One of the things about the Macrophyllas is they will definitely attract pollinators, and they'll dig around and see if they can find something. But then they're kind of disappointed because they're not really finding those fertile flowers that have the pollen. So when you're looking at the flower, for example, because the Arborescens is a mop head, when you're looking at it and you see what you consider to be a flower, it seems to have a petal structure radiating from the center. They're not going to find any pollen in those. However, when they just start to bud and they're just very small, kind of pinpoint, dots almost before they actually bloom, that's where the insect is looking for the pollen. but they're not likely to find it, unfortunately, in a flower that's going to completely open and bloom.
What about the lace caps? Are those considered arborescens?
They are considered arborescens. We're going to talk a lot about those. Those are the ones that you really want to go for if you are looking for pollinator attractors. The lace caps are the winners.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions from anyone else about either of these two methods?
I have two questions. First of all, every year the deer ate mine back completely.
Yeah.
This year, nobody touched anything, so they're really quite large. And I have not pruned them at all. What would happen if I didn't prune them? And is it best to prune them?
Okay, what type of hydrangea are you talking about?
I think the lace cap is mostly what I have.
Okay, it's probably a Macrophylla then.
Probably, I don't know.
Basically, there is no problem. What I would do, and this is actually what I tend to do, I tend to wait until the plant actually starts to bud. So when the dormancy breaks and you actually start to see buds, you can selectively prune at that point. So if you've left the flower heads on, you probably want to take those old flower heads off. But you can prune down to right above where there is a bud coming out of the stem. And that kind of gives you an idea of how much or how little you need to prune. You'll also find perhaps some canes that are obviously dead because they're not blooming at all or budding at all. So you definitely want to prune those out. But I tend to not prune except very judiciously like that, because in some situations, I want my plant to be large. So there is absolutely no reason to prune. And the plants, especially if you've left the flower heads on, you'll find that they actually tend to kind of self-prune a little bit. Once the new growth comes in, the flower heads that are at the top will tend to kind of snap off and blow away. So I find mine all over the yard often. So no, pruning really is, as I said, you want to control the size and shape. You want to cut out any dead or diseased sections. And it hasn't been blooming for a couple of years maybe, and you want to do some revitalization. So pruning is not mandatory under any circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to clarify that Macrophylla, Macrophylla, I probably don't pronounce it quite right. Those are native to Japan.
Japan, Korea, right? China,
Asia.
Those, yes.
And those include both. Does that include? So that includes some lace caps.
Absolutely.
And does it also include the snowball kind?
It does. It does.
Okay.
So mop heads and lace caps are what you see in the Macrophyllas. You very rarely see the panicle shape. The cone,
right, and the panicle shape is the cone
kind
shape.
of a cone shape, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Cone. So, okay, so let's move on to method 3. These are the ones that bloom on new and old wood. As I said, the endless summer is that original variety, but there are so many varieties now that are classified as ever bloomers or rebloomers. They're not truly rebloomers. So, for example, if you have a plant that has really bloomed a lot and you remove all those faded flowers, it's not necessarily going to rebloom. But you're going to have constant new growth on those kind of plants. So during the growing season, you're going to see new growth coming out and you're going to see new flowers. So it's not like some varieties of perennials, for example, where you can actually deadhead them, cut them back, and you'll actually get new blooms. So I prefer to call them ever bloomers rather than rebloomers. With that variety, the ever-blooming variety, you are going to see many more dead stems than in an old wood plant, a plant that only blooms on old wood. Some of those original Macrophyllas, the oak leaves, and your climbers. So basically, you want to combine methods 1 and 2. That's the way to do it. As I said, you're going to see more dead stems, and you can easily identify them, especially if you wait until they break dormancy. They're the ones that don't have any buds coming out on them. The wood tends to, if you really go out right now and look at your hydrangeas, you can really see that the wood takes on a different color. It's a more of a grayish color than the sort of reddish brown color that you normally would see in an actively blooming or alive stem or cane. So again, you can deadhead, you can remove those faded blooms anytime that you want. It doesn't affect the plant's ability to bloom. When I talked before about your old wood plants, the reason that you want to be judicious about the time of the year that you prune those is because if you prune them too late or really too late after they've stopped blooming and the flowers start to fade, you potentially are cutting off the stems that are going to contain the buds for next year's flowers. So, if you get out there and really like, oh, I'm cutting all these things off, you may be decreasing the amount of blooms that you get in the next season. Disease sections, as they occur, should be removed. So if you see some disease sections, if we get a late frost, sometimes you will see blackening of buds if they've already started to bud out. Don't be too quick about cutting those off. I've written a series of articles that are on the fairfaxgardening.org website about getting late frosts and how to treat that. Some people, if they get a late frost or a late cold snap and their hydrangeas have already started to bud out, they go out there and they start cutting off all this blackened material, and they end up cutting off some areas that actually will produce some new buds. So you want to be careful about that. So as I said, I have a couple articles on fairfaxgardening.org, our Master Gardener website, that talks about that. In fact, we have quite an extensive library. I'll give that a little plug right now and give it one at the end of the talk. As I mentioned, allowing some dead branches to remain on your arborescens will help kind of prop up the new growth so that you could actually keep it from flopping over without staking it. And they will also, if you don't cut them back, they will also sometimes continue to grow, rebud, and then bloom, and you'll have a much larger plant. If you have yes.
So we're not up on the terminology, or some people may be more than I am, but the arborescens are the natives that are not the maple leaf.
The oak leaf, correct.
Oak leaf, sorry.
Right. That they're sometimes called smooth hydrangea.
Smooth hydrangeas.
I do tend to use the names, and it's good to familiarize yourself with the names because sometimes the common names can be misleading. So if you're looking at plants or you want a particular type of plant and you're just going by the common name, you may not be getting exactly what you want. So it's kind of easy with hydrangeas because you only really have 5 varieties, as I said, or 5 species that we're even dealing with. So it is good if you want to become a hydrangea aficionado. It is good to familiarize yourself with those names, and there's a lot of really good information out there that will detail more than I can do in this particular talk, the different varieties that are in each of these species, so you know what you're looking for.
Okay.
especially with your old wood plants, you can revitalize them if they, for example, suppose they've been blooming well and then for a couple of years they just don't seem to be producing very well. You can kind of revitalize them in the same way that you might do a lilac tree. You would go over a 3-year period, cut out some of the larger, older canes, or you can just take the, all at one time approach and cut back the entire plant by about 60%. Most people usually prefer, if you have the patience, to do the three-year technique, because then you do get some blooms every year. And the plant actually is healthier doing it that way than doing it all at once. It does take it a while to recover. So if we don't have any more questions about this particular area, we can go ahead and move on, but I'll take some questions right now if anyone has them. You're muted, Maggie.
I'd like to just review the types of hydrangeas. I remember Paniculata.
You have the Quercufolia, that's the oak leaf.
Yeah.
Paniculata, and basically it's Paniculata because it's identified by that panicle flower shape.
Okay, the panicle.
Which is the cone, the inverted cone, the inverted ice cream cone, I like to call it.
Okay, so there's...
And then the Macrophyllas, typically they have a heart-shaped leaf with a serrate edge, so a toothed edged leaf that's kind of heart-shaped. And it has both lace caps and mop heads for flower shapes. The Arborescens are the native, as are the Quercufolias, the oak leaf, which you can tell, again, the oak leaf has the panicle shape, flower head, and it also has a leaf that is the same shape as an oak leaf.
Wait, the Arborescens?
The Arborescens has a smooth leaf, does not have a serrate edge, and it is not heart-shaped. And they come in both lace caps and mop heads.
Okay. So we have I'm going to mispronounce Macrophylla, which comes in lace caps and mop heads and is Asian. We have Paniculata that is Asian. We have Quercufolia that is native.
Right.
And we have Arborescens that are native.
Right.
And these...
The anomalous, the climbing hydrangeas, they are lace cap. They have a less significant flower than other hydrangeas.
And are all of those Asian?
Those are Asian, the anomalous, yes.
Okay, so the only ones that we have that are native are the Quercufolia and the Arborescens.
That's true.
And the Arborescens come in both lace caps and mop heads.
You've got it.
Okay. All right.
All right.
I'm trying to hang in there.
Okay. So let's go on and talk about uses in the garden, because there are so many uses for hydrangeas. You can basically use them in so many different ways. So you can use them as a foundation plant. As I said, the Quercufolias in particular are very good as foundation plants because it tends to be drier. Sometimes, depending on the siting of your lot, you might get more sun and less shade. So they do very well. This particular picture is of the Annabelle hydrangeas, the Arborescens, the one that you see there. You can use them as a hedge. They really are amazing as a hedge. One of the ones that's very popular to use as a hedge is this is a Paniculata. This is Limelight right here. So they have a couple different varieties. Limelight gets quite large. They like full sun. Paniculatas like full sun. So they do very well in that regard. They also have a smaller variety called Little Lime. And there are several others that are definitely noteworthy. And, you know, you could probably spend a lot of time browsing the internet for all of these different varieties, and it's an awful lot of fun. There are some that really lend themselves to being specimen plants. This is actually an oak leaf, a Quercufolia, called Ruby Slippers. And it makes a fantastic specimen plant. As I mentioned before, the oak leaves are very receptive to a full sun environment. So that's another reason that it can really make quite a statement in your yard or garden in a full sun capacity, because they also tolerate drought and heat much better than some of your other ones. You can put them in a container. The number of plants that have been hybridized to be dwarf varieties has just exploded, just like all of the hybridization has. So they actually are well suited to a container. You want to make sure, because you're probably not going to bring it inside, you want to make sure that the container that you put it in is one that can withstand winter weather. In this particular one, it's in a stone urn. So this here is a Macrophylla, and you can again take a look at that leaf shape, and you'll see it's got that heart shape to it. And that's pretty much how you can identify it. Just like you can identify a tree by its leaf shape, you can do the same with a hydrangea. They do very well on slopes. So in this particular application, they're in a backyard that has a sloped area. And this particular master gardener decided that she was going to use a combination of Macrophyllas and Annabelles on this slope. So she really has a nice color palette here because you can get those different colors and the different blooms. If you've ever been to any of the places like Chanticleer, Longwood Gardens, or why am I not thinking of the other one in Delaware? They make quite a statement used to line a path. Again, this is kind of the same idea of a hedge, but actually defining a path by using hydrangeas can really be quite a statement and can lead people into the garden. You can use them in formal and informal beds. Again, you choose the type of hydrangea that you want for the look. In this particular setting, they used a lace cap because they tend to have a less formal look than the mop heads. But again, in certain settings, like that woodland setting, you don't get the feeling that it's a formal setting, even though you do have a number of mop head hydrangeas, a mix of both the Arborescens and the Macrophyllas in this particular photo. You can certainly use them to attract pollinators. As you'll see here, I'm actually showing you all lace caps because, as I mentioned before, that's what really attracts the pollinators. And you can get quite a few different varieties. If you look at that center picture, or even the one that's on the right, you will see that there are all different kinds of insects. It's not just a bumblebee. You have small bees, you have different kinds of flies. Butterflies are not necessarily strongly attracted, but you will find butterflies, especially small butterflies, cabbage whites, or some of the smaller butterflies on your lace cap hydrangeas, feeding on those fertile flowers.
So all of these are arborescens?
All of these, that first one actually is called a serrata, but it's actually a subgroup of the Macrophyllas. The other two are both arborescens.
Mm-hmm. What did you say it was again? The blue one?
It's a subspecies of a Macrophylla called a serrata.
Serrata.
Yeah, you can see the tooth-shaped outer edge of the leaf, but it's not a heart-shaped leaf.
Okay, so that's the lace cap Macrophylla?
Yes.
Okay.
But if you were looking at the nursery, you would be looking for Hydrangea serrata. I
think I have some of those. And the other ones are the natives that are really draw in more.
They are. Yep. Mm-hmm. You can also use them in the home. Hydrangeas actually make very good cut flowers. The one thing that you do have to do is when you cut them, you need to ensure that they're going to be able to uptake water, because they have the stems, once you cut them, have a tendency to sort of seal themselves. But it's really easy. There are a couple different methods. I don't really have time to go into them, but the particulars of them. But Martha Stewart actually has, if you just do a research on it, a search on the internet, she actually has a couple different ways that you can do it. You can use a boiling water method where you dunk the stem in boiling water. You can use alum powder, which you can just buy in the spice section of the grocery store, or you can actually smash the end of the stem to allow it to do uptake. So they're very good when they're fresh. As you can see, I have quite a colorful selection from my gardens. And when they're dried or starting to dry, that's from my oak leaf. The picture on the right is from my oak leaf. And they really, and it dried more than this. It's actually like totally brown right now. They get to a point where they get kind of so dry that they aren't dry anymore. I mean, that they start to kind of crumble and fall apart. But, fortunately, I always have an endless supply if I want new ones. And I think, from me personally, this is the reason that I like hydrangeas more than any other plant in the garden. And it's because they provide four-season interest. So if you leave your hydrangea heads on your plants in the winter, you actually look like you have a new species when the first snow falls and the snow covers all of them, and you kind of reminded of summer that you once had these nice little heads on your hydrangea, these flowering blooms. And of course, this is an Annabelle that dried, and I just, as I said, I just leave them. I don't usually cut the flower heads off once they dry. And it has a beauty of its own in the winter. In the spring, when they just start to come out, they look so beautiful when they're starting to bud. This is my, the picture towards the top of that is my oak leaf hydrangea starting to bud and come out. They have wonderful winter interest, the oak leaves do, because the bark is kind of cinnamon colored and peeling and twisty, and it really is very interesting looking. But when they start to bud out in the spring, they have their own kind of beauty. And when the new buds and foliage come out, this is on my Tokyo Delight, my Macrophylla lace cap. It really has this beautiful kind of yellow green color that's very pretty. In summer, when that Tokyo Delight blooms, it blooms in multiple colors. So it starts out as blue and then it turns pink. And then of course your Annabelles and your Macrophylla combination, which I have in the summer photo. The white one is an Annabelle, and the combination pink, purple and blue one is Macrophylla, one of the endless summer varieties. And in the fall, the oak leaf cannot be beat. The Quercufolia, the oak leaf, cannot be beat for the gorgeous burgundy foliage that you see on that plant. And as the flowers start to dry, this is the other one is a limelight. As the flowers start to dry, they turn kind of this beautiful pink color, and the foliage on the limelight gets a beautiful yellow color, and the fall light shining through it is just a thing of beauty to behold. So value as pollinators, we do want to talk a little bit about that. We've got about 10 more minutes. The Macrophyllas are certainly the showiest, but they're not necessarily the best attractors. One of the things that you're probably aware of, as plants are hybridized, sometimes they lose some of their characteristics from the original. For example, fragrances. So you probably are aware that plants that in their original variety may be very fragrant, sometimes as they are hybridized generation after generation, they lose some of that. The same thing to a degree happens with your Macrophyllas, even your lace caps. But there are varieties of the Macrophylla lace caps that are attractive. And natives are generally, but not all the time, better than non-natives for attracting pollinators. So your Arborescens, particularly the lace cap varieties, and then the two of the different varieties of Arborescens, the subspecies, Cinerea and radiata, are also native plants because they are Arborescens subspecies, and the Quercufolia. Your Paniculata and Macrophylla and Anomaly, as I said, can also be attractive to pollinators, but generally speaking, and certainly borne out by the Mount Cuba Center and the University of Delaware research projects, are not as attractive as your natives are. So what's the difference? Well, we've got, this is right out of the research report, which again, I recommend that you go ahead and download. You can print it off as I did, because it's got a wealth of information. But the lace caps versus the mop heads, the flower head is called an inflorescence. And a flower like a lace cap, that is actually called a corym. So if you ever come across that in a crossword puzzle, you're going to be able to get it and nobody else will.
How do you spell corym?
It's right up there on the slide, C-O-R-Y-M-B. You don't pronounce the B.
Oh,
so
I see.
Corym. Okay.
Okay.
And all of those little buds that you see in the center, those are actually fertile flowers. And as I explained, the ones that actually look the most like what we think of as a flower, petals radiating out from the center, are actually sterile on hydrangeas. So you can see that the pollinator is going to be attracted to the fertile flowers. They may land on the mop head because it's so big and so showy and just like, wow, this is a target that I can go for. And that's what they'll do. But they will, unless they can kind of dig in there and find a bud that hasn't quite bloomed, they're going to flock to your lace cap varieties because they are full of fertile flowers. And this picture and more of an explanation is actually in that Mount Cuba report. But I thought this was a good illustration of what the difference is and why pollinators are attracted to that lace cap variety. So just to reinforce, if you want to look for attracting pollinators, you want to choose the inflorescence type versus the species. So that's more important. So your lace caps or panicles, where you can actually see those buds that are fertile, are the ones that are going to be more attractive to your pollinators, and your mop heads are going to be less attractive to your pollinators. Even though they might initially attract them, they're not going to stay there and be able to get pollen and nectar. The 4 varieties that I have here are all wonderful specimens for your hydrangea garden. The white dome is an Annabelle, is an Arborescens. The Twist and Shout is one of the endless summer collections, and the Twist and Shout are all lace cap varieties. The Peewee is a Paniculata, and you can see again from the panicles that those will eventually all bloom, but at the time that it's just starting to bud out as an early flower, it is going to be attractive to pollinators. And then your mop heads, your Incredible, which is a kind of new and improved version of an Annabelle that has stronger stems, is the one you need to go for. So the next portion of this, I have some varieties here, and Maggie, I can send you some of these slides so that you will have these lists and you can distribute them to your folks if you'd like to.
What did you just say about the last, could you back up one?
Sure.
Thank you very much. So what did you say about the Incredible?
The Incredible is pretty incredible. It's kind of a new and improved version of an Annabelle in that it has huge mop head flowers, but the stems are much stronger than the original Annabelle. So it doesn't tend to flop over as much as the Annabelle does.
Does it attract pollinators?
It probably will not attract pollinators. I have a little chart here. It is 10:50 now. I know you asked me to stop.
Right. Well,
the last 2 that I have is pretty much talking about the Mount Cuba report, which I think has some good information.
Please proceed.
Okay. All right. So this one, as I said, is just a list. I'm not going to go over all of these things, but you and I can just communicate via email, and you can let me know, which slides you might like to have so you could share with folks. And this is probably one of them. If you have plants that are not pollinator attractors, I do just want to point this out. You can always plant pollinator attracting perennials and annuals nearby, and they will come to your garden because they will see those beautiful mop head, huge, colorful flowers. And then they will discover, hey, I've got pollinators here. So you can actually attract pollinators to your garden with those mop head varieties. Just make sure that you provide some other sustenance for them via other plants. Mount Cuba Center, this is on my list in the before times. I had planned to go see this actually in 2020. Obviously wasn't able to get there. I'm kind of hoping I can get there this year. It's just a short drive up to Delaware, and you get to go to all of to Winterthur. That was the place I was thinking of, and Chanticleer, a little quick trip to Pennsylvania, and Longwood Gardens. So it's kind of right in that same Brandywine area. And they did a study. You can see this online, the one that I showed you that I printed off. You can actually look at it online at this particular website, but just go to Mount Cuba Center. It's right there on their front page. So you can find it very easily. And it's just mountcubacenter.org, and you can get there. And this just talks a little bit about their mission statement. You can download this. And then the research project itself, we'll just go through some of these. It was conducted at the Mount Cuba Center in the hardiness. Their hardiness zone is 7A and 6B. Ours here is, depending on where you live in Fairfax County, is probably 7B. So they will do very well, at least as well as they did in that particular zone. It included 3 species of hydrangea, the Arborescens, the Cinerea, and the Radiata, which are subspecies of the Arborescens, and then 26 cultivars of those 3 species. It spanned a 5-year period from 2017 to 2021. They were evaluated to assess how well they did in the landscape, their pollinator attracting capability, their display, and how well they did, as I said, in the environment. They were grown in either full sun or partial shade in a clay loam soil with pH near 6.5, which is, again, pretty close to what we have. If you don't know what your soil pH is, you can always obtain a soil test kit and go ahead and follow the directions, get that soil test done, and send it to Virginia Tech with a small fee, and they will respond with a report about your pH, any deficiencies or excess in your soil, and how to correct them. And throughout the trial, they were actually given kind of minimal care. They didn't use fungicides or supplemental water except during the very first year of establishment and during any extremely dry periods that they had. And that was basically designed to approximate typical landscape maintenance practices. You know, we know we're not out there every day. We're not pros. You know, so it's a realistic research project. So basically, they gathered information in 2018, 2019, and 2021, analyzed those, and then they were ranked by their performance in those different areas I mentioned before. The report details both assets and liabilities of the 9 top performers, and then goes on to list the 5 honorable mention ones. So that is all contained in the report, and I'm going to show you an example of what the report looks like. There was also at the same time, not as long, but during the same time period, there was a study that was being done at the University of Delaware on pollinators, and that's included in the report. There are several charts detailing pollinator visitors' profiles, and then an overall 5-point or star ranking of the species and cultivars in the trial. The overall assessment from both of those studies was that the pollinators visited lace cap hydrangeas more than mop heads. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have mop heads, but if that is your main objective, then you probably want to concentrate on that. I mean, those are my favorites anyway, so for me, that's not a problem, but I do try to have a nice variety of hydrangeas. And it also included findings about growing in shade, different pruning and propagation methods, and that's also very valuable information. So this is the research report that talked about overall ratings. So as you can see, I want you to pay attention first. I want to draw your attention to the color column. If you are looking for colorful hydrangeas, blues and purples and all of that, you're not going to find them in the Arborescens varieties. Almost exclusively, the Arborescens are white. There has been some hybridization to have pink ones. And I wish I could tell you, I planted in the fall, and one of those, that third one there, the Invincible Spirit 2, which is a pink mop head, and I planted it in full sun, and I am really anxious to see how it does this year, because I obviously bought it last year when I saw it was in bloom. I saw what the bloom was going to look like, but I haven't seen it actually perform in my landscape. But this particular chart was very encouraging to me that I probably put it in the right spot. So these are the top 14, I think, that we have. And as you can see, I mean, the scores were pretty high, even for the ones that weren't necessarily pollinator attractors. They were high for performance. So, you know, again, look at your landscape, see how big or small you can take. This chart is really helpful, and you can download this and all of the other information from the website at Mount Cuba. Now this one I actually reordered, which it allows you to do, so that you could see the pollinator rating and have it ranked that way by top to bottom. So the ones that are in bold, the names that are in bold, are the ones that they identified as top performers in that other rating. And as you can see, you've got several right there at the top. Haas Halo being the #1. So you know what I'm going to be looking for at the garden center this year. I want one of those. I've been looking for White Dome for a couple of years. I haven't been able to find it, but I'm on the search, and I'm determined to go ahead and find one of those. And Total Eclipse also did extremely well. Those are all lace caps. Yes.
I was just going to ask if the White Dome is a lace cap.
It is. As you can see, I have in the chart, it actually has your flower type.
Oh, it does. Right. Okay.
Lots of real good information, your height, your spread, flower type, color, what it needs as far as sun, shade, whatever, your bloom time, pollinator rating, and whether it's patented. In other words, you're going to be looking for a particular variety. Some of them are patented varieties. Proven Winners and Monrovia Nursery are both. Proven Winners is one of my favorite nurseries. I always can get dependable plants if I buy Proven Winners. And they're not outrageously expensive compared to other plants. Sometimes patented ones are. I have not found that. So I have a feeling that Haas Halo and Dardum, the trademarked as White Dome, are probably going to be easier to find, especially since this has been published. This was actually published last year. Okay.
And I just want to tell the ladies I'll be sending you that. And it's something, I think you have to download something in order to open it and to print it.
Yeah, it's a PDF. Yeah. So yes, you do. But it's easy. PDF, the PDF reader is free. I have a couple options here for research. Michael Durr, if you're familiar with him, he is, you know, like such a plant expert. He's one of my heroes. And that book for Hydrangeas for American Gardens is certainly in my library, as is Lorraine Bellato's Success with Hydrangeas. I have some websites here that are great. American Hydrangea Society is, I think, currently the excuse me, currently the membership fee, I think, is $35, and it's well worth it. You can actually see, and I don't think you need to be a member to see this. You can see their if you go to their website, they have the garden tours, the hydrangea garden tours that they've done over the years, and they're really interesting and very inspirational. And then, of course, we've got lots more resources from Fairfax County Master Gardeners, and we hope that you will take advantage of those. You can go to our website. We've got a garden library. We've got timely articles. That's fairfaxgardening.org. We have a YouTube channel, which again has great information, plant clinic, online plant clinics, which we've had to do during this time. And then we're also on social media, on Facebook and on Instagram. So we hope you all will bookmark us, visit us, use us for resources, because we are very helpful, I have to say. So I ran a little bit over. I apologize for that. I can take a few questions if, in fact, time permits. Maggie, that's going to be your call.
Please go ahead and ask questions. Does anybody have questions?
Do they take moving well? I moved one from under my family room window to a wetter area, and that particular one has done very poorly. I wonder if it's the location or if it's a characteristic of the bush.
I have successfully transplanted hydrangeas. You know, when you say a wetter area, I think that would be a bit of a concern for me. Is it an area that stays wet all the time, or does it dry out? You know, when you say wet, it's very wet. That's probably the issue. They do not like, they actually are susceptible to root rot in areas that stay wet. So you really need an area. That's why they do well on slopes, because the water kind of tends to slough off. So I would not plant them in an area that stays wet. What you could do in the spring is you could dig it up and take a look at the roots. If they're blackened, it may be a goner. But if they look like they still have some white or light brown parts on them and they're not, you know, I mean, you're going to be able to tell right away if you've got root rot. Then you probably can successfully transplant it to a spot that does not stay consistently wet.
A friend of mine worked in a nursery, and she said they call them dehydrangeas because they need so much water. So that's why I thought that would be a good spot.
Yeah. I mean, even though certain types of hydrangeas do, some are more drought tolerant than others, there are really no hydrangeas that like to have constantly wet feet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Elaine.
Yes.
Would you send me, I think, the end parts of the slides that focus on the native hydrangeas?
Sure.
We're really focused on trying to support our pollinators and the other things in the garden. And even though I have some of the other kind, as going forward, we're trying to plant the ones that are more native.
And I think that's great. The one thing I do want to point out about hydrangeas and using exotics rather than natives is they're not invasive. So, you know, the problem,
well, that's good.
The problem with using exotics sometimes is that they tend to take over and then they suppress the natives and, you know, they don't support the native environment. So you don't want all exotics, but if you do have some exotics, you want to make sure that they're non-invasive species, and that's going to be helpful to you. And as I said, you can also, rather than taking them out, you can also plant pollinator attracting plants around them, because they will initially draw them in with those very showy blooms. And then the pollinators can find, you know, I've got these other things. As far as the deer love mophead hydrangeas. So they will, if you have deer, they will come and have a feast, and you will go out there and all of your hydrangeas will be decapitated. Unfortunately, you know, as we say, you know, deer, when they're hungry enough, they'll eat anything, but they certainly will go for their preferred plants. And as we all know, you know, hostas, azaleas, hydrangea, mophead particularly, are particularly attractive to that four-hoofed wildlife.
You're probably not willing to send all of your slides, but love to have them.
I can judiciously send the slides. Some of the pictures, I tried to caption them all appropriately, but I wouldn't necessarily want to be sharing them, not knowing where they might end up, because some of them, even though I can use them for a presentation like this, they can't be widely distributed because that would violate the copyright.
Well, we're not distributing at all.
I trust you on that. I'll just be a little judicious about what I send.
Well, that sounds good, particularly differentiating the different kinds.
Yeah,
well,
and as I said, there are so many good information sites that you know, that you can find. The American Hydrangea Society website is a great resource, as is, there's some, you know, other sites, but yeah, you can find a lot of great information about that on their websites.
Well, thank you very, very much.
You're
We're
very welcome.
appreciative. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, you all are going to have your meeting. I'm going to step out. Thank you very much for inviting